Greetings, class, and welcome back. Today we're going to start our new unit, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is really a combination of two words. As you can see, photo, which means light, and synthesis, which means putting together. So photosynthesis is about taking the sun's light and putting it together to create something new. Before we talk about photosynthesis, we need to review what energy is. Remember, energy is the ability to do work, and it's also one of the needs of all living things. We talked about that earlier in the year. On planet Earth, as far as we're concerned, basically all energy, for all living things really, originates from the sun, which might be kind of hard to believe since we're not plants, we can't make our own food, but indirectly we are recipients of the energy the sun provides, as you can see in this diagram here. The sun is what provides the energy for the autotrophs through photosynthesis. And then we as heterotrophs or consumers will eat the autotrophs or the producers. And as you can see in this diagram here, you can see the sun powering the growth of those plants, which are eaten by the cow, which in turn we eat later as a hamburger. So the energy did originate from the sun, even though it was transferred. Energy was never created along the way. That energy already existed. But there were energy transformations that occurred along the way. And that's what we're going to be looking at in both Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Now, if we talk about energy, we've got to talk about the energy form that's used by the cells. That's called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This is a molecule of ATP right here. You can see the adenine, the ribose, which is the sugar, and then the phosphate group at the back end. ATP is the molecule that is used by the cells to do the things that the cells need to do. I mean, we eat food, we get glucose, carbohydrates, fats, all those things that supply energy, but those are not in forms that the cells can use. The cells need that particular form of energy converted into ATP before the cell can actually use it. And within the ATP molecule, it's actually the bond between this phosphorus and this phosphorus on the end of the ATP molecule that actually releases the energy that's used by the cells, which gives ATP kind of a unique relationship. ATP is actually like a battery. In fact, it's like a rechargeable battery. When ATP does things for the cells, like say, for example, power active transport or something, that last phosphate breaks off, and the energy is released between the bond between the second and the third phosphate. ATP needs to be continually recharged. You have only a limited supply of them, and that takes place through cellular respiration, which we'll be looking at in the next chapter. But we do need to eat things like plant material, that kind of stuff, to supply us the carbohydrates. But those carbohydrates need to be converted into ATP so that the energy can be provided to the cells. Here's a great diagram of what I was talking about. You can see here the ADP plus P. This is an ATP molecule that's been consumed. It's been used for whatever the cell needs to have done to it. But like a battery, say in your cell phone or your iPad or something, it needs to be recharged. And so you can see what it looks like when it's fully charged. All the three phosphates are there, hence the name adenosine triphosphate, because it has the three phosphates as opposed to adenosine diphosphate, which only has the two phosphorus molecules at the back end. So ATP can get recharged when it's consumed, which makes that very efficient. It can be used over and over again, and your cells are continually recharging ATP molecules so they can do the things they need to do. So now that we talked about ATP and energy, let's start our study of photosynthesis. But before we do that, let's look at some of the important historical contributions that led up to our understanding of photosynthesis, a process that really took a few hundred years. It dates all the way back to the 1600s with Van Helmont. He did one of the earliest experiments that are attributed to our understanding of photosynthesis. Up until that period of time, scientists really believed that plants grew because they ate the soil. What Van Helmont did was he grew plants, and he only watered them. He kept track of the soil amount and the water amount, and the only thing he added over time was water. And he found that these plants grew, and they grew a lot. So the only thing he added was the water, and he found there was very little difference in the soil over the time period. So the only thing he could, of course, conclude was that the water had something to do with the growth of the plant. So it's a small step, but scientists are beginning to understand some of the raw materials needed for photosynthesis. Water, one of them, of course. Joseph Priestley, a little more than 100 years later, he puts a candle in a jar and it goes out. He puts a candle in a jar with the plant and it burns for several days. He helped us discover that plants make oxygen. And it's hard for us to believe nowadays, it's so obvious to us, but until the 1700s, humans didn't have an understanding that plants made oxygen. Here's a diagram of his work here. You can see in the top slides, without the plant, there was no supply of oxygen. So the mouse could not survive, as you see in the picture, nor could the candle stay burning. But in the bottom slides, you can see, with the addition of plants providing the oxygen, combustion could be sustained, and oxygen could be provided for an animal to survive as well. A couple other important experiments. Ingenhouse's work. He took Priestley's work and expounded on it, showed that plants only released oxygen when light was present. So now scientists are really starting to get an understanding. They're starting to get an understanding of the raw materials, things like water is necessary. Plants are making oxygen as part of whatever they're doing, but now they're starting to realize plants also need light to produce this oxygen. And then Engelmann's work in the 1880s helped scientists get a better understanding of not only the light, but the type of light that was preferred by plants. He used a prism, as you can see here, and he split the light up into its component colors. And then he used Spirogyra, which is an alga, a plant-like protist that undergoes photosynthesis. And he found that those Spirogyra produced the most oxygen in certain wavelengths, in the red areas and the blue areas, and almost none in the green. And how did he check that? He used bacteria that consumed oxygen, and those bacteria kind of conflagrated around those areas where the red lights and the blue lights were shining, which were obviously areas of the most photosynthetic activity. So by this point, scientists are beginning to get a really good understanding of this process of photosynthesis. So what is photosynthesis? And what is cellular respiration? These are two reactions that are very much dependent on each other. Photosynthesis, of course, is about taking the sun's light and converting it into a form of energy, chemical energy, that can be used by plants in the form of glucose. Also provides oxygen as a byproduct, which both are needed for cellular respiration. And cellular respiration provides the raw materials for photosynthesis. You can see the carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and water vapor as well, which is produced when we exhale. These are the raw materials of photosynthesis. So these two reactions are really dependent on each other to power really all life on planet Earth. And we'll be looking at these two reactions over the next two chapters. Now, before we talk about photosynthesis in detail, we've got to talk about light, specifically visible light, which is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which contains all the different forms of energy that travel in waves. Visible light is a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's the part that we can see. And visible light is composed of 7 colors, Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And if you look at this diagram here, you can see some of the different types of wave energy, starting on the left-hand side with the gamma rays and moving all the way across to radio waves. But in the middle here, between ultraviolet and infrared, you can see a little swath of stuff. That's the visible light. That's the only part that we can actually see. And that's what we're concerned with for this particular unit. Now here's a great question. Why are plants green? Why are school buses yellow? Why are the desks in science class black? Why is the whiteboard white? Okay, that's a great question. It has to do with the lights and how they're absorbed and reflected by the different substances that we see. Now in class, for example, we're able to see a myriad of colors because we have white lights in the room, and white light provides all the colors of the spectrum. Everything that you see in our classroom, a plant is green because it's absorbing all the colors of the visible spectrum and reflecting the green back. So it appears green because the green is being kicked back because the green was part of the white light that was provided to it. If the green wasn't in the light that was provided to the plant, we wouldn't be able to see it. All the other colors are absorbed in, just the green light is reflected back. That's why the plant is green. The school bus is yellow because the yellow light is reflected back. Our desks in the classroom are black because they absorb all the colors of the visible spectrum. Our whiteboard is white because it's reflecting all the colors of the visible spectrum. At home has chemicals in them. Chemicals that are designed to capture certain light wavelengths and to reflect certain light wavelengths. We call those chemicals pigments. And in the case of like I said, those chemicals are called pigments. And in plants, you traditionally have a particular pigment that's called chlorophyll, which you can see here, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll is a pigment that's designed to capture the sun's light and use it to energize electrons for photosynthesis. There are also other types of pigments in plants. These are called accessory pigments like carotene and xanthophyll. These are the pigments that you see in the fall up north. As the chlorophyll starts to die off, these colors become revealed and give you all the beautiful colors that we see, like the browns and the oranges and the reddish colors of the leaves as the plants get ready to go dormant for the wintertime. So now let's take a look inside the plant cell, specifically at the organelle that's responsible for photosynthesis. That's the chloroplast. The chloroplast is the organelle in which the sun's light energy is converted into chemical energy that can be used by the plant to provide its energy, and later by consumers as they eat the plant material. Now, the chloroplast is actually made up of several interesting structures. It has these pancake structures which are stacked on top of each other. These are called thylakoids. The thylakoids are arranged in stacks. The stacks are called grana. The thylakoid membranes actually contain special areas with pigments like chlorophyll that are designed to capture the sun's energy. We call those areas or regions photosystems. And that's where the first part of photosynthesis takes place. That first part of photosynthesis is about actually capturing the sun's light first, which powers then the rest of the photosynthesis process. Now, in between the thylakoids is a lot of liquid space, like you can imagine like syrup for the pancakes. We call that the stroma, and that's where the other part of photosynthesis will take place. This is what a typical chloroplast looks like. You can see here the stacks, the grana. You can also see them here and here. And then in between, the stroma, the liquidy area. This is one thylakoid in the stack. Zoomed in there, you can see. This is where the photosystems are that are designed to capture the sun's light and energize electrons for photosynthesis to begin. Again, the vocabulary you want to be familiar with in terms of the morphology or the structure of the chloroplast include, again, the granum, which are the stacks of thylakoids, the thylakoids, which are the individual pancake structures with the membranes that contain the photosystems for the beginnings of photosynthesis, and then the stroma, which is the area around the grana, where the second half of photosynthesis takes place. Now, photosynthesis. This is where we're going to stop today. Photosynthesis looks like this. It's about taking these raw materials, carbon dioxide and water, and light energy, and through a series of steps, converting this light energy into chemical energy in the form of sugars, carbohydrates, and oxygen as a waste gas. But the star of this whole process really is right here, the chloroplast. That's why you'll see it's between these arrows. It is inside the chloroplast where these energy conversions take place. The process we called photosynthesis. And in part 2 of our lessons, we'll look closely at the two parts of photosynthesis, the light-dependent and the light-independent reactions.